Welcome to the Politics People. We're joined today by author, comedian, political pundit, activist. You've seen her on Have I Got News For You, GMTV this morning, Question Time. I'm talking to Kate Smurthwaite. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Nice to chat to you, Paul.
Right, so the premise of this show is that activists and commentators have had more influence over politics in the past decade than most elected politicians. Are you conscious of having had any influence over British politics yourself?
Well, I mean, it'd be really depressing if I thought I hadn't. Like with the amount I put my back into it, I'd be quite depressed to think that I was having no impact. I can point at like direct cases where like MPs have read out things I've said in Parliament, or I've had conversations with people and they've advocated for stuff. MPs I've written to or campaigned to, and they've come out in support of things. But I also wouldn't want to be the person who was taking all the credit for that, because I know a lot of MPs are getting dozens and dozens of messages, and you never want to be there going, yes, it was all my work. But of course, I set out to influence people, and you influence people both directly and indirectly when you influence, public opinion on subjects, and then politicians have to listen to that, or you raise awareness about something and other people start asking about it and you change attitudes. So, yeah, I think it's super important. And I like to believe I have influence. Otherwise, I'd be quite annoyed about it.
Well, I think you have. As I say, it's been an even split so far.
Well, you chose to invite me on, Paul. So let's assume
Exactly.
You felt I was relevant to the subject matter.
Exactly right. No, look, it's been an even split, I think, in contributors so far. Some people just won't have that they've had any influence at all, and it's self-evident that they must have, even if it's just helping people form an argument out in the populace. It's crystallizing either side of a discussion, for instance. So I know. Listen, I like that you've so readily acceded that, because it's obvious that you have. You're everywhere. So you're actually the first comedian that we've had on the show, and it's apparent to me again that the comics are probably at the forefront of this punditry these days. I mean,
well, yeah, you're totally right. Comedy is a really interesting one, and I think a lot of comedians will insist that they're not trying to change anything. Look, I'm just a comedian. I'm just the funny person. I'm just being silly. I'm just trying to make people laugh. And then quite often they'll say that, and then you still think, yeah, but the point you made is actually more insightful than anything I've heard on a serious news show all week. And I also think that comedians do that sort of to take the pressure off themselves a little bit, like, no, I'm just trying to be funny, and it's a way almost of like not having what you say held to account. But I'm not personally one for doing that. I kind of feel the opposite. There is some research actually out of the US that says that jokes have a bigger impact on people's opinions than facts do. And that shouldn't be true, but it simply is, that people laugh along with something, and then they sort of, by the end of the laughing along, they're like, yeah, I've always thought that. And it gets into their head much faster than somebody sitting there going, actually, 12.3% of people who have had experiences, that doesn't get in people's heads in that way. You get that kind of, whatever, I'm looking for the statistics that back up my existing point of view. But when I start laughing along with something that's not my existing point of view, it's much more likely to get into my head. And there was some academic research that showed that, which I, in turn, talked about in my show. I did a show called My Professional Opinion in about 2013 that I won some awards for, that was all about going on debate shows and whether we could influence people's opinions. And to sort of cut a long story short, the net conclusion is, no, you will never change the opinion of the person sat in front of you, but that's not the point. What you do affect is the opinions of all sorts of undecided people who are witnessing the argument. That's where you have your influence. It's never that the person you're debating with turns around and goes, I suppose you're right.
That's I know, yeah, it's true. You never ever see that.
I'm not suggesting, I would hate you to think that I'm being this pessimistic. I'm not suggesting that people can't change their minds, that it's only sort of wandering voters who can have their minds changed. People do change their minds, but not in the middle of a heated argument. People only solidify their opinions basically in the middle of those arguments, or very, very rarely. But I mean, when I was on Question Time, there was in 2013 there was a question about dredging rivers to prevent local flooding, and I said, well, these rivers have historically been dredged, and people have built their houses in the area on the basis that these rivers would be dredged.
Right.
So it seems to me that it is incumbent upon local authorities to keep dredging them, because otherwise they bear some responsibility for the floods. And then afterwards, the Guardian columnist and thinker George Monbiot wrote to me and said, and just laid out and said, actually, there's a better way of doing these things. Actually, planting local forests creates long-term drainage solutions. Dredging rivers, actually, the more you do it, the more you have to do it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It causes clogging, and it actually makes the problem worse in the long term. And there's a better way of protecting these areas, blah, blah, blah. And then the next time somebody asked me, I was like, I know better now. So I do believe that opinions can be changed, but I think sort of that very careful, measured approach, hey, I appreciated what you said, I think we're on the same page here, but there's some other information you haven't thought about. I'm super ready to change my opinion in that circumstance, but I'm never going to change my opinion because somebody's just screaming at me with theirs. So yeah.
Well, no, I think that's. See, I didn't know until this. I'm aware of. I come from the UK comedy scene years ago as well. So I keep tabs on it. So I've seen your career blossom. I've seen you take over the UK comedy scene. But I didn't realise that you'd come out of international finance.
Well, I didn't really come out of international finance. I worked in finance when I left college because I was broke and it was the best paid job I could find. That's the short version of the situation. And I didn't hate it. I found myself surrounded by people I didn't, in some cases, have a lot in common with. But that's true in the UK comedy scene as well. I mean, wherever you go, you're a fish out of water. That's kind of normal. And there were ways in which that was true in finance. But there were also people I met there who were absolutely brilliant, who I'm still friends with. I never went into banking as a kind of like, this is my vocation in life. I had no money and I owed a lot to student debts, and I didn't want to like end up dependent on relatives, and I wanted to like get myself established or whatever. I didn't have a particular plan either about what I wanted to do with my life. So I thought, well, just take something well paid. And I did that for about 8 years. And then by the end of that, I had a much better idea of what I wanted to do. And I also had paid off my debts and had some savings and was in a position to be a bit more artistically free to do it. And I do think that really helped me in the early days, that I've never felt like I have to do comedy gigs just because they pay, or I have to adapt my material to make it more populist or anything like that. Like the fact that I had a little bit of money in the bank meant that I could be a bit more free. So I don't sort of regret that choice, although I can't say I ever really massively enjoyed banking. But, as ever, you meet some interesting people, you learn some interesting information. I think when it comes to political comedians and political activists in general, one of the upsides is that I really do understand financial markets, which for a lot of people are like, oh, they're these mysterious things that are bad for us. And I actually have a much more in-depth and nuanced view. Not that I think they're universally wonderful or universally evil, but you always get that online. Oh, you just don't understand the economics. And I'm like, yeah, no, I really, really do. I spent years in there. I know exactly what this is about, and what, it gives me, I think, a much stronger foothold for talking about economic type things and financy type things. Yeah.
Yeah, you see, look, and this is why you're so good. It's I can just sit here and you're teasing out these threads for me. It's exactly that. First of all, working in international finance, I was only bringing it up because I wanted to know whether it had informed your politics at all. Because, listen, I don't know you, but I perceive you as being on the left of politics.
Yeah. Yeah, and you think of banking as being on the right, and I certainly wasn't. I didn't go into banking because I was super right wing and then changed my mind.
Right.
But I certainly went into banking, I would say, moderately left wing, and I learnt a lot on the way through, and I also to a great extent sort of saw how the other half live, and I saw I sat in on meetings where people were going, right, there was an earthquake yesterday. What are going to be the best buys out of this? And I was like, there's still people in the rubble. This feels harsh. And I guess there are a lot of people around the world who imagine that those conversations must take place. But I've actually sat in them and gone, are you seriously talking about how we should actually be investing in local construction companies, because there'll be a lot of rebuilding needed now that whole town centre's been flattened. And you're like, really? Am I in this conversation? Whoa! I guess it does work like that sometimes. So I think it gives me a bit of insight sometimes to have been. I think that's always true, though. I think in a way you learn more going to a conference held by people you hugely disagree with than you do going to the one where you're like, well said, everyone. I mean, you should go to that one too, because it's life affirming and you'll meet people that you might want to date and stuff, but like still, you should always. I did a debate for Revelation TV. I don't know if you've ever come across them. Revelation TV, the church without walls.
No, they haven't reached the West Coast yet. So.
They're a British TV channel, although they're all filmed out of the south of Spain by a sort of the sort of people who moved to Spain in their retirement. And
I have heard of this. No, I have heard of them. Yes, sorry. Yeah. Anyway, go on. So expat community in Spain.
Making religious TV. Yeah, that's what they do. And I did a debate for them about abortion, and the first thing they said when I got there was, "Oh, it's so brave of you to step into the lion's den," like as an atheist feminist, to go on a Christian TV channel. And I was like, I think it's the Christians that got eaten by the lions, mate. I'm not too worried, but really strange experience, quite unsettling. But on the other hand, I got free jolly to Spain, so I'm not complaining. I got to waltz around Marbella, and I got a good story out of it that ended up in a show a few years back. So yeah, I'm happy with my trade.
You are basically at the pinnacle of showbiz at the moment. I mean, like I said, you comedian, and a prominent comedian. This is the point. You're actually very prominent. This is a long-winded way, a very, very long-winded way of saying that you get cast in that story about Spain. Sort of underlines it really. Talking to you, way more nuanced, way more self-deprecating, way more reflexive, if you like,
than I play on TV.
Then you play on TV, and I'm saying it is as much and I'm really not trying to denigrate it at all, but it's just as much of a playing a comedy character like anybody go and do 20-minute stand-up. You're often brought in to have the counter opinion because that's become a valid platform in its own right now.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I sure don't go on shows and say anything other than what I really think. But at the same time, you're absolutely right that they're all. But also, I think that highlights like how skewed the media is a lot of the time, and also how easily shocked. If I go on a show and talk about being polyamorous, like the presenters just fall off their seats, and I'm like, yes, I have sex with several different people. Woohoo! Like, it's 2020. Could we all get the smelling salts out and sit back up? And it's interesting. I mean, even something as simple as like, I must have been on TV 5 times to talk about not shaving my armpits, which is like, it could not be less interesting. I mean, I just can't be bothered. I'm a bit busy, and I also haven't had my eyebrows waxed because I'm a bit busy. I just think there's more important things in life, but it's very much that focus, and also they get on sometimes some ridiculous people, and I sort of sometimes think, why on earth are you putting these people on air? But given that they're going to, I'm like, right, I'd like to go on and explain why they're being ridiculous and why that's a nonsense. And so, but for TV purposes, they always want it to be like fiery row breaks out. It all kicks off.
Yeah, it's the Mrs. Merton thing, isn't it? Let's have a heated debate, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, it makes better TV. There's no point in having a TV show where we all sit round and go, well, that's a great point. Thanks for making it. I thought both sides said interesting things. That's not the kind of TV that we make. But yeah, in terms of the comedy circuit, I don't know. I don't think the comedy circuit is in such bad shape. I mean, it is now in the middle of lockdown. Obviously, it's an absolute train wreck in the middle of lockdown. But more broadly speaking, I don't think it's in such bad shape. Like, you're right that there are individuals who are struggling, but I think these days there are more people trying to do comedy.
That's right.
And
That's the
that's
point.
fine.
It's become saturated.
That's totally fine. And it's also actually totally fine if there is a fair old slice of people out there who are really only trying to do it as a hobby. They're not trying to make a living.
Yeah.
And actually, I think good for them. I think getting up on stage and having a go, it does wonders for your self-esteem. It makes you feel a bit special. You show off in front of your mates. And for a lot of people, that is their ambition, and it's fine. And I think what people sometimes are missing is that they do that and they do all right, and then they're like, "Well, I'm making a living."
Yeah.
And you're like, because it's a job, and if you actually want to do it full time, you need to work at it full time. And that's not just like booking up gigs, but it's also writing material and looking at other ways of getting your stuff out there. If you're actually like a working comedian right now, I sort of think, well, have you got an online video series or a blog or a podcast or a this? Like, because you can be generating that stuff. If your gigs are 20 minutes a night, then there's plenty, and you should be using that to market your work. And I think the people who put their back into it can make a living. I'm thinking about, for example, Stuart Goldsmith. I mean, there's a man who, you know, if you watch his shows, they're really clever. They're really cleverly thought out. He's obviously taken a great amount of effort to study comedy, and he doesn't just write, you know, a couple of anecdotes that are true. He writes complicated work that he's actually done it's easy to tell that funny story that happened to you and your dad down the pub.
Yeah.
But to actually be writing new material night after night and taking that story, honing it, making it better, applying comedy techniques to it, I think in a way the level of the best comedy has gone up, and we can't be surprised that therefore at the lower level it's harder to make money. But you just, like, I also get annoyed when people expect me to pay £10 and then I get there and it's all brand new acts mumbling about. They don't know. And you're like, well, hang on a minute. And I go to Edinburgh and some people are like, oh, yeah, I'm doing my first solo show. And I'm like, what's it about? And they're like, oh, it's just sort of some stories about. And I'm like, you want me to spend a whole hour of my life and you don't even know what it's about? Like, is it about global warming? Or is it about, you know, family Christmases? Or is it about 20 songs that are going to make you feel happy? What is it? Like, how can you be asking me to spend an hour of my time with you and not making it somehow substantive? Although I think a lot of people would argue that I've gone too far the other way. My shows are all about something and I should just, you know, zip it and write more jokes sometimes.
I think this is the international finance banking side of you coming through. This is that whole cream rises. That's the common. I used to, you know, for a fleeting moment, I used to have some level.
You know, I mean, shit also rises, Paul. You know, shit floats too. There's a lot of, I think, low quality.
Shit doesn't float. Shit doesn't. Have you been to a swimming pool? It sinks. That's why they have a man with a basket on the end of a stick. Yeah,
some shit floats. I don't think that just because I don't think.
I'll tell you what we'll agree on.
What they're doing is necessarily worthwhile, but I do think that people who become successful, they know what they're about and they've got a purpose to what they're doing.
What we'll agree on is, depending on the buoyancy of the food that you eat, depending on the air trapped in your diet, your shit may or may not rise. Can we just, even if that, can we just agree?
Some
is
shit
that
floats.
possible? Some shit.
I expect cream might sink if you leave it long enough.
Oh, fucking hell! Wow, that would be. I didn't expect this to be turning into the great egg race, but you're right. We should actually have some sort of science going around this. Now, again, honestly, I am genuinely surprised. This was not the points that I was expecting you to make. Because honestly, the way you're portrayed on TV, and I'll be blunt, is that you would be supportive of every person with a rambling act. Because I basically, for the brief time that I was, you know, I used to be a noise in the UK comedy scene. I used to pay to go and see my own acts at comedy clubs because I wanted to see whether I thought that the audience were getting their money's worth. And I just think that accelerates the whole sort of process because it is obviously a commercial thing. I didn't think you had that sort of you had that angle. So I think it's refreshing to find out that about you.
I mean, I think broadly in society there should be a greater safety net for people, and that we should support people, and you know, and make things like training more widely available, and so on and so forth. But I don't think that that's the problem with the UK comedy circuit. Now, is there an issue with the fact that, it can be difficult for people to get a foot in the door if they haven't got money behind them. I mean, yeah, it is, and I had exactly that problem myself, and I wouldn't want to have an industry where there's no way in. But I also think that there are some ways in, and perhaps we could make them better and more constructive. And I'm happy to be part of that conversation. But I don't just want every 2-bit rando, new act sort of given their own show just to be on the fair side.
Yeah, no, exactly, because that's kind of what happens already, isn't it? But it's awful. But when you started though, what was if issues hadn't come up, were you just going into comedy for the purism of comedy, for the purity of comedy, or did you always have an eye on getting a platform?
I did have a political blog at the time that I started doing comedy, but I
Did
didn't
you?
ever really intend to put the blog and the comedy together. I wanted to do comedy and just do like non-political comedy. The first few years of comedy, I didn't really talk about politics at all. And in fact, I wanted to talk about other things. My first solo show I did was called Adrenaline, and it was about dangerous sports.
Interesting.
And that was a lot of fun because I love doing dangerous stuff and jumping off things and riding things and climbing over things and skiing down things and stuff like that. So I thought that I would do a show about that. But then as time went on, there were more and more political things that I wanted to say. And I know that my blog, people often would say it was very funny, and that was doing quite well. I don't write it anymore, but because I do my News at Cape videos. But I sort of was in that position, and then I started to really notice the amount of sexism I was experiencing in comedy, and I was like, well, I guess I'm going to talk about that because it's happening right now, and I'm annoyed about it, and it's what's on my head. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to start talking about that, actually, you know what, I'm doing politics now. So,
Right.
and I wouldn't want to be the sort of political comic who only talks about the problems that affect me, because actually, like, do you know what I mean? Not that you shouldn't, because of course the first time you ever get involved in politics is always when it affects you. That's the only way into politics. Very few people are just sat there in Los Angeles going, I hear there's a problem in Bangladesh, but actually, if you're gonna complain about the problems that you've got, it's only fair to look round and go, who else is having a rough turn of it right now?
Yeah.
And write something that covers that as well. So then I started comedy in 2004, and my first solo show was 2006, and then it was about 2 or 3 years later. I think about 2009 maybe was the first year that I did a full-on hour-long political show in Edinburgh. That was the first year that I was just like, right, what the hell?
Wow.
Let's just do politics, yeah.
And who did you again, I didn't plan this one, but who did you like before you got into the circuit professionally? Were there any comedy idols that you had?
I don't really remember back then. I used to go to lots and lots of comedy gigs, and where there were lots and lots of acts that I saw who weren't famous, but I used to go to lots of comedy nights, and I used to sort of follow the circuit quite enthusiastically. And of course, some of them went on to become famous, and some of them, decided to retire and move to the countryside. And I think when I started in comedy, it was more that I saw circuit acts and thought that looks like a really fun job, and I really want to do that. And it must be said that I still love comedy for the touring and the meeting people and the hanging out and the doing festivals and the doing variety bills and different people every night and the trains and the hotels, like that lifestyle. I love it, and that was definitely something that I saw, and I was like, I want to be a part of that. That's got to be the funnest way to live. And I wasn't wrong. I still think that, especially in lockdown when I can't. And then, I mean, yeah, I have always loved the political comedy shows, but that didn't necessarily make me feel that I wanted to do it. I've always loved like Tina Fey and her sitcoms and stuff like that. She's just a genius. I love how clever
She's
her
got
writing
such a
is.
light touch, isn't she? She's so extraordinary. Her work is just so.
Yeah.
She just makes it look effortless. It's where she gets laughs. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yes, and I mean, like, I'm such a dork about it, but like, she uses some really, really sophisticated techniques. When I'm teaching people comedy and stuff, I'm like, okay, we've done the basics, we've done the intermediates. Now I'm going to show you what Tina Fey does. Like, whoa, this is another level. Like, yes, there's a lot of shows like that. I'm just in lockdown because I watch box sets all day. I've just
Yes.
been rewatching Community. which
Oh,
is just
Community's fabulous.
great.
Yeah.
What a wonderful series.
Ended up on Yahoo, didn't it? That was the thing.
Mhm.
It was an interesting one. But uh,
Mm.
again, this is total kite flying, and I feel like we know each
Mhm.
other now, so I can ask you this. Booking you, I mean, I've had some big names on here, and but booking you's been the hardest, just technologically. You know, you've got more of a kind of a firewall up than anybody I've dealt. I still don't know your email address, for instance. Okay.
Oh, really? Because it just came through my website and
That's
back.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No complaints. I'm just wondering, has that sort of evolved? Because I mean, basically, do you get a
Yeah.
ton of abuse, and
Yeah.
is that why you're a bit more
Oh
guarded?
my goodness. Yeah. I don't go a week without a death threat, Paul. That's
Wow.
my life. And to be honest, death threats are actually a rarity. It's mostly rape threats, which and that kind of stuff, and also people urging me to kill myself. I get a lot of that. And to be honest, I mean, like as long as they don't seem to know my address, or as long as it doesn't seem like they're actually going to do it this week, that stuff doesn't bother me very much because it's very obviously abuse. And then there's all the people who want to tell me that I'm ugly and talentless, and again, I don't really care, because it's just obviously abuse. But then what is much more sinister, is the people who are messing with you at a slightly more sort of aggressive level. So you get a lot of people who will message like, I really love your work and I'm a big fan and I'd really like to sponsor your work and I'd really like to see how I can support you. And you think, like I got to engage with this. And indeed, I'd love to put you on my show. I'd love
Yeah.
to, I can do something for you. And you engage with them. And then as you get a little bit further into the situation, then they turn around and go, the only thing is that, I mean, I agree with what you say, but don't you think that sometimes you're too aggressive and you're like,
Right.
well, if I feel passionate about something, you can interpret that as aggression if you like. But it's just me being passionate about what I think. And then it starts to slip. And well, if you won't even listen to my arguments, well, suddenly you realise that they
Right.
haven't actually
Right.
intended to engage with you at all. And that is not the worst of it. The worst of it is the people who write to clubs where I'm booked to play and say that I'm a terrible person and that if they book me, I mean, like the weirdest things, clubs being, I sell my mailing list to third parties. I've been reported repeatedly to the Inland Revenue for cheating on my taxes, just
Wow.
because people are trying to get me audited because of how much of my time it would waste if the Inland Revenue came round and wanted to go through my receipts. I mean, like they would find nothing of, do you know what I
Sure.
mean?
Sure. Sure.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
You shouldn't even have to say that. No, it's just total abuse
But
of the
yeah, they just
system.
know it would waste a month of my life if I actually got
Mm.
audited. So they constantly write to those things. And at one point, some people contacted the police and said that I was a paedophile. And, of course, the police were like, well, we've just got nothing here. So we can't, they haven't identified, they were just like, she's a pedo. And they were like,
Mm.
but, we sort of have to like, keep an eye on these things or whatever. But like, yeah, people trying to undermine my work. So, for example, right now, I am banned from posting on Facebook for the next week.
Really?
And that's because people just go on social media and report everything I say because they know that occasionally the algorithm will get it wrong and will agree that I've said something that's a problem. And each time, so when the first time they do it on Facebook, you just get a warning, and the second time you get an hour's ban, and then it's 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, blah blah blah. And
Wow.
the next time they're successful, I'll get a month off Facebook, and so then I have to find other people to post things for me. I estimate that internet abusers destroy approximately a third to a half of my career.
Wow, it's another world. It's another world. But
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have been. I was not aware of that. I'm a very late adopter of all this social media stuff. I didn't understand about all the algorithms until quite recently. But they can be manipulated and abused directly. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's worth noting about it is that we know, like those of us who are on the receiving end of this, we know a great deal about what happens. So individuals on platforms that don't moderate, like 4chan and Reddit, put together lists of targets for internet abusers, and then they bandy together and target people. And I know because as soon as I went on TV and debated with like Milo Yiannopoulos or Peter Lloyd, I appeared on those lists. The term they use is lol cows because you can be milked for the lols. It's hilarious.
Wow.
And we also know that the actual number of people involved is remarkably small.
Yeah.
Like I might get hundreds of pieces of abuse every week, but the actual number of people behind it is incredibly limited. When Meghan Markle got married to Prince Harry, and they was getting just tons and tons of racist abuse, they actually did investigate because she was important enough to investigate, and the police decided not to be useless for a weekend, and they identified that the majority of it came from 6 individuals.
Wow, really?
So these people have just set up multiple accounts, and I know it because I can see from the grammar they use, and I can see from the expressions they use. Like they'll say, you should wash your hair, you look like a tramp. And then I'll get, you should wash your hair, you look like a tramp 20 times. Or you're very trampy, what about washing your hair? Hair greasy much, you tramp. And you're like, okay, I know this is the same person, or the same person's mates, just like repeating that. They get like an idea in their head of what might upset you. And then it's like, well, you were obviously raped as a child. And then they've actually been doing, which is quite funny, they've been doing in lockdown, you're obviously putting on weight in lockdown, which is quite funny because actually I've been kind of losing weight. I've been quite stressed and working out and not eating very well. So I was kind of like, you're 180 degrees wrong on that. I'm actually getting a bit thinner, and it's probably not very healthy, but thanks for saying I look fatter. That's great, guys. Cheers.
Yeah, yes, I don't want to dwell on it, but I can't imagine of going through something like that, having that permanent sort of background noise of bile without it being fairly debilitating for me.
Yeah, I mean, the first time it happens, it's a big deal, but I mean, I'm furious about the impact it has on my career, but I'm also, I think, way past the point where I kind of obsess over individual messages or think about that kind of stuff very much. I sort of think, occasionally I go to the police and report something, and then I'm like, why did I bother with this?
Right.
This is driving me mad. I mean, there's stuff I do act on because it's got my address in it, or it seems like it's a very, but I'm certainly not bothered by the fact that I log onto Facebook and there's a message saying, here's what horrific sexual activity you should be forced to engage in, and I'm like, okay, great, because I mean, for starters, we know that whoever was writing that wasn't getting laid at the time, were they? So it's like, yeah. I mean, it's weird. Like, the thing about hate is it's a full-time job. You can't take weekends off. Like, you fighting hate, you can like chill out at the weekend and then get back to it, and you can go, I'm going to skip a couple of protests and I'm going to spend some time with people I care about and have a great time. You can't really take time off from.
No.
I don't know, it seems weird, isn't it? You're stood outside the thing like, you're all rubbish, and then it's like, oh, hey everyone, who wants a pint? It doesn't seem like.
I know. I know a couple of people, and relatively successful people, very successful. One of them who literally is just driven by, his entire career is driven by hate and revenge towards other people. Very, very nice, kind of charismatic person on TV, but it's an extraordinary kind of energy to have to give to something and to try and motivate yourself with. It baffles me every single time.
Look at Donald Trump. Everything that ever happens, he thinks it's about him. Like the other day, he said that people wearing masks to try and prevent getting COVID were doing it just to make him feel, just to make him sit, to annoy him. Like that people were doing it to make a point about his opening up policies being wrong. And you were like, they just don't want to catch a bug, and they've put a face mask on, and but in his head, it's like they're doing this to hurt me, and it's like, yeah, I wouldn't want to live there. That would be a stressful place to live.
Have you got any conservative friends?
I mean, there are some comedians who, I can think of one in particular who does a show about being Tory that I'm quite friends with. I went for a coffee with in Edinburgh, and I'm not. I don't know. I can't really sort of tell you where the line is. There are definitely people. There are definitely people where I would go, look, I'm just not going to hang out with those people because I just find their opinions so obnoxious. And there are people who I've been friends with, and then I've seen their opinions and gone, I think I need to draw a line here. But it's not the case that the line I draw isn't, anybody who's ever voted Tory or whatever. The line I draw is much more like, as long as people are reasonable and willing to engage. And also, I think some people are just ill-informed, and actually it's better to be friends with them and have that conversation. And it doesn't mean I won't sort of call them out if they're saying something I disagree with. I was very close to my grandma, and she was full of opinions that wouldn't sit very well in a Black Lives Matter universe. But
Yeah.
least. But also, what I wouldn't do is sit there and go, oh well, she's getting on a bit, so let's just all pretend we agree with her. I'd always be like, no, that's not right. You can't say that. That's not even true. Like. And I think in a lot of ways that was one of the reasons why she and I did have such a great relationship, because everybody else sort of would nod along and go, oh, there, have your biscuit. And I'd go, no, statistically, immigrants don't commit more crime than other groups of people. Like, okay, now let's have this conversation. Well, I read somewhere. Well, where did you read it? Well, that's just one person. That's not, ting, 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 ting.
Yeah. No, that's what it's about, an exchange of ideas. I'd say this is not a topical podcast. It doesn't even attempt to be vaguely important. But I can't have you on without asking about, it seems to me that the UK comedy scene is just at the brink of having its Me Too moment. Is that...
I know.
Is that...
It's exciting. It's exciting. I said when Me Too happened, actually, I said it on stage. It was in my show. I said, I can't wait for the Me Too movement to hit the UK comedy circuit, because there's going to be so many slots opened up. And I said that facetiously on stage repeatedly, like, oh, it'll be brilliant. There's going to be so much work coming my way. The bills will be empty. Muggins will be booked left, right, and centre. It's going to be awesome. And it does feel like it's happening. Of course, it would happen the week that I'm banned from Facebook, so I don't get to even join in. But I also feel more broadly, I want these things to work. I want these things to work. I want people to not be sexually harassed. I want the police in the US to stop targeting people of color. Like, I want these things. They're incredibly important, and these movements are important, and I want to be a part of it, and I want to keep the pressure up, and I don't want these things to be an overnight. We talk about it one day, and a couple of people get in trouble, and then it disappears. But it also feels a lot to me like they are like the Me Too movement is the feminist movement that the patriarchy can handle. It's the Me Too movement is like, it's difficult for women, isn't it? Because they're so sexy.
Right. That's good.
It must be so difficult for women because of how sexy they are. And I feel the same about the Black Lives Matter movement. It's a really important issue, but the whole idea of like, it's difficult for black people because the police have a bad relationship with them.
Right.
Like the police think they commit crime. Like it is a real issue, and it does need addressing, and it should be addressed. But actually, if we're going to have genuine equality, there's a lot of other stuff. I don't just want to not be sexually harassed at gigs. I actually also want to be respected and taken seriously and given the same opportunities and all of these things. And actually, people of colour need the same thing. They don't just need to not be shot by the police, although, of course, we would like that.
That would be a nice start, yes. Exactly,
yeah, I mean, everyone would like that as step one. But they also need to be taken seriously at every level of, government and politics and, social things and in the media, and given, equal weight across all these different platforms and in business and in finance and in all these different areas of life. And it does feel sometimes like, I mean, it's not that I've never been sexually harassed or bothered at a gig, but it still bothers me more when I don't get booked. That's what I want, is just give me the work. And, and of course, and the truth is that a lot of the time they don't book me because they know when I get there and they try to sexually harass me, I'm the one person who won't put up with that shit. So on the one hand, I think I've probably been sexually harassed less than most women on the circuit, but not at all. But I also think that because people know I'll stand up to it, they're not necessarily booking me, and that is its own little spectrum of mess.
So have you experienced that? You've been booked at gigs, and maybe because you haven't reciprocated the overtures, you've then subsequently stopped being booked at that particular venue.
Oh Jesus, yeah. I mean, that's especially when I was new.
Yeah.
And these days they don't book me in the first place because they know I'm the sort of bitch who won't put up with the shit they're trying to pull. But in the early days, oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, I was straight up offered radio jobs if I'd let some creepy guy do anal. I mean, it was just like, and I'm glad to say on the whole, I told people to shove off and didn't give them much of my time. But at the same time, I'd still look back and think, maybe I should have, been, I don't know, softer about it. Maybe I could have somehow got the work without.
Well, not for radio. Not, I mean, maybe the Apollo, but it's just he's got to get a higher base.
To get on the Apollo, you have to get on the radio first. I mean, it's a constant. And yeah, I've been told that I could do radio shows, but only if I went in the studio naked. Yeah, this
Wow.
guy.
And
I mean,
this
yeah,
is
like
UK. This is UK mainstream, not some idiot in Los Angeles podcast. This
no,
is UK mainstream broadcasting.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, you didn't even ask for any topless pictures or anything, Paul, for your podcast. You're so reasonable.
Yeah, no, it's that firewall you've got. But
Yeah, exactly. I'm a bit picky. What can I say? But yeah, I mean, we
that's
all know it
shocking.
happens, and it does happen, and it needs to end. And then once it's ended, another 50 things need to happen so that women are given the same, the same level of respect and let into what is, in a lot of cases, still a boys' club. And we need to get out of this world where we think a decent festival lineup is 19 guys and 1 woman, and it's actually news if a woman wins an award, like, oh, lady wins award, forget who she is or what she does, and female comics being listed by their boyfriend's name, and the fact that the #1 channel for comedy in the UK is called Dave. The whole thing is like,
That's a very
it
good
needs a lot
point.
of work.
That's a
But
very good
I'm
point.
glad it's coming to the fore. Once I'm allowed on Facebook again, I might even have a little go myself and join in.
Yeah. So just I'll let you get back to your life. But you're not off Twitter at the moment though. You're allowed on Twitter still.
No, I'm on Twitter and Insta, and I'll be back on Facebook in a few days. On Saturday, I think I'm back on Facebook.
And for something, and for you, for this, let's just say this Me Too UK comedy thing, it's better. Is that better distributed on Facebook? Are there certain platforms where a topic is better addressed? Like does Insta is better for X part of your career and Twitter for another, and
I mean, Insta is not great for discussing things. The good thing about Insta is you get a lot less abuse on it because it's just for photos. I do use Insta, but if you follow me on Insta, what you will see is like what I'm up to on a day-to-day basis. That's where I'm like, oh, look at my lunch, and oh, look, I'm traveling, and oh, look at this weird road sign, and look, there are ducks in the river, like all that stuff. That'll happen on Insta. Twitter, I mostly go on to like kind of engage in debate and chat and stuff like that. I've got a lot of Twitter followers. And then Facebook is a much better place for putting longer posts and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I've got a Facebook group, News at Kate group for my videos, but also that's where I put up most of my stuff. Yeah. And even though I'm not able to post on Facebook, I just ask friends of mine to put stuff in that group. And then
if it's okay with you, then I'll add all the links into this podcast so that people can follow you. Listen, I'll do that immediately. This has been absolutely delightful for me. I hope it's not been too grim for you. I've just really enjoyed myself talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Fun, Paul. My pleasure.
Really kind of you. Thank you so much.
All right, I'll speak to you soon.